We detected our own death screams broadcast on 17 different frequencies 47 minutes before we died. Yet here I record this account 3 days after our predicted termination. I am interrogator lex mechanic Van Serek of the Ordo Malleus, sworn to the Emperor's calculus of dread. This testimony concerns Adeptus Mechanicus Research Station Omicron Sanctus, orbiting the cinder world Canticus Mortis like a metallic prayer bead suspended in his infinite void. The station should have been silent. Instead, it sang. The impossibility manifested during our approach vector. Through 17 inches of consecrated adamantium hull plating, we heard music. Not the mechanical hymns of servitor choirs or the binary cant of machine spirits, but something else entirely. 9 notes repeated in mathematical perfection, each interval calculated to resonate through bone and ceramite alike. The melody possessed no discernible beginning or end, flowing like sacred oils through vacuum that should not carry sound. Telemetry, I commanded, and our cutter's machine spirit responded with clinical precision. Auspex, external sound pressure, null, hull resonance detected, 9-cycle cadence, 17 discrete source vectors within target structure, pattern designation, non-agonal. Tech Dominus Ixarath 9 hunched over his console, mechadendrites stilled as if listening. His augmetic vocal cords clicked in measured binharic, seeking communion with the station's machine spirits. Omicron Sanctus answered not in sacred code, but with a chord that carried disturbing warmth, almost affectionate. The numbers repeated themselves like a ritual mantra. 9, 17. 9 again. Recursion folded inside an equation I could not yet solve. Hospitaler Seraphina knelt between crash couches, hands wrapped around a reliquary that trembled against her sternum. Her breath steamed in air that should not have been cold. Frost feathered our viewport, crystallizing into non-agonal rosettes that spelled words in condensed humidity. Cantus Perfectus, written as if by invisible fingers. Time until Mechanicus fleet arrival, I asked. 11 hours, 13 minutes, Sergeant Castor replied. His Tempestus scions sat armored and ready, their silence professional, their eyes betraying recognition of something beyond standard threat parameters. Assume they will not request permission before sanctification, I said. We are the only Imperial jurisdiction present. We are the line between caution and doctrine. The station grew in our forward port, a cruciform spindle bristling with 9 peripheral arrays that moved without wind to guide them. Heat radiators articulated like the shutters of a great eye. At certain angles, the arrays resembled cathedral organ pipes. At others, the horns of something predatory. Vox log, long-range hail, Ordo cipher, no response. Station maintains hymnal transmission on all frequencies. I authorized a second hail in Mechanicus cant. Omicron Sanctus replied by incorporating our transmission into its song, harmonizing our words until tactical reports became musical notation. The sensation of being watched settled along my shoulders like a ceremonial stole. You will not coax this spirit with binharic, I told Zerath 9. It has chosen its language. Language is protocol, he replied. Protocols can be broken. He was correct, but not in the manner he intended. Auspex, cross-spectrum analysis, reveals anomalous energy at 17 kHz intervals. Internal power draw exceeds reactor capacity by 27%. Temporal drift detected, 0.9 seconds per 9-minute cycle. Temporal slippage, I noted, tasting copper at the back of my mouth. Confirm readings. Confirmed. Chronometer synchronization required every 9 minutes. Recommend caution. Sergeant Castor made the sign of the Aquila against his chest plate, a small iron movement old as fear itself. I checked my own chronometer. Someone had scratched 9 shallow marks on its bezel. I could not recall when. The death screams came as harmonic overlay. One moment, the hymnal. The next, our voices woven into its fabric like screaming metal. My own voice, unmistakable. A man learns the exact pitch of his own breaking. Breach, now, Emperor preserve, followed by wetness like tearing parchment. Trooper Hale behind me shouting prayers he would not finish. Zerath 9 clicking like insects trapped in amber. Seraphina whispering litanies of illumination that simply stopped, as if candles had been pinched between vast fingers. 17 channels, 17 perspectives. The same terminus. Playback temporal index? My voice remained steady while another version screamed. Index, plus 47 minutes, 23 seconds from current chronometer. Predictive modelling, Zerath 9 suggested. The station project's probable outcomes. No, Seraphina whispered. Not predictions. Remembrance. Her reliquary vibrated in ways sacred artifacts should not. The smell of machine oil was clean and strong, but beneath it lurked something chalked and dry, dust like old bone. We approached the docking Taurus, with its hazard chevrons scratched and burn-marked, showing no signs of battle, no evidence of life. Negative space has its own taste. This tasted like the inside of an ancient sensor, cold and used and waiting. Auspex. 17 acoustic loci triangulated to central spinal structure, detecting unknown crystalline mass. Crystalline formations, Zerath 9 observed. A perversion of sacred geometry. Or a reliquary, Seraphina countered. The docking collar engaged with soft, authoritative impact. Maglocks clamped shut like patient jaws. The hymnal deepened, sinking through deck plates until I felt an enormous presence pressing itself against our small vessel, listening. Pressure, equalization complete. Seals, integrity confirmed. Helms, Castor ordered. His scions locked masks with clicks that fell into the hymnal's meter. Zerath 9 extended a mechadendrite toward the hatch controls, while Seraphina stood with unfocused eyes, as if adjusting to illumination that was not there. Remember, I said before we crossed that threshold, nothing is holy because it shines. Nothing is true because it achieves perfection. If something names you, do not answer. The hatch cycled. Cold bled through like a slow blade. The corridor beyond stretched mint white and immaculate, plated bone with cables running like tendons in shallow grooves. No devotional posters, no prayer wheels, no scratches of bored sentries, only curve and colour and sound. We crossed into Omicron Sanctus. The hymnal ceased. For one heartbeat, the station held its breath. I heard my pulse, the whisper of servo motors, Seraphina's reliquary tapping once against her breastbone. Then the music returned, rearranged, the 9-note sequence blooming into different harmonies that made my spine loosen, as if under a singer's touch. It spoke our names in high Gothic, so pure, it tasted of silver. Van Serek, Zerath 9, Seraphina, Castor. The voices were not strangers. They belonged to men and women whose obituaries I had signed, centuries dead, their throats long turned to dust, yet here bright and whole, and singing us deeper into a place that did not forget. Gravity betrayed us in 9-second intervals, a subtle tide that pulled at our viscera with mathematical precision. One moment, my boots held firm against deck plating. The next, I floated weightless for a heartbeat before slamming down as if the station exhaled through its superstructure. Sergeant Castor's hand signals adapted to the rhythm. Count the pulse, ride the wave, move between the gravitational sighs. The corridor stretched before us, like the throat of some vast instrument, its walls curved to channel acoustics rather than mere passage. Where devotional alcoves should have housed sacred icons, we found servitors locked in eternal genuflection. Their vocal augmetics had been surgically removed with clinical precision, leaving scarred throat cavities where vox grills once nested. Yet still, they produced the hymnal through skeletal resonance, rib cages vibrating like tuning forks, skulls humming at frequencies that made my molars ache. Auspex readings, I commanded, tasting copper at the back of my mouth. Tech auger. Local gravitic field fluctuating in non-agonal cycle. Power consumption at 127% reactor specifications. 17 discrete acoustic sources detected within single forward chamber. Zerath 9 approached the nearest servitor, mechadendrites extended in ritual greeting. The machine thing's head turned with grinding joints, crystalline formations growing where eyes should have been like frozen tears. When it opened its mouth, no tongue remained, only a hollow chamber lined with calcified neural tissue. "Blessed be the Omnissiah's perfect song," it said without vocal cords, words resonating from within its chest cavity. Zerath recoiled as if struck. His augmetic systems began clicking in rapid bursts, not binharic, but something approaching musical notation. "The machine spirits respond to unauthorized protocols. This violates Ordinance 17 through Theta." "Not unauthorized," Hospitaller Serafina whispered, her voice distant. "Perfected." She knelt beside a devotional font where sacred oils had crystallized into non-agonal patterns, geometric formations, suggesting mathematical precision rather than random accumulation. The crystals chimed softly when disturbed, each tone contributing to the station's greater symphony. Incense burned in colors that possessed no names, casting shadows that fell in directions gravity could not explain. I accessed the nearest cogitator interface, its panels fused with glistening organic matter, neural tissue woven into circuit boards like devotional lace. The readings defied interpretation. Power drawn from unknown vectors, atmospheric composition standard yet somehow wrong, reality itself negotiable. Cogitator interface, accessing archived files, project designation, Orpheus, classification, Magos Supremus, harmonic navigation protocols active. The data logs materialized as wavering hololiths, technical specifications intertwined with theological treatises. The core concept emerged through careful analysis. Warp navigation using perfected human vocalizations as acoustic anchors, creating stable corridors through the Imperium maintained by continuous harmonic resonance. They sought to sing their way through the warp, I realized. More than that, Zerath corrected, optical sensors focusing on schematic displays. Permanent passages, predetermined routes carved by mathematical precision rather than navigator intuition. The implications crystallized like the oils in Serafina's font. Reliable warp travel without psychers. The galaxy's greatest mystery reduced to an equation. The Mechanicus had attempted to make the Immaterium itself an instrument. We pressed deeper into the station's heart, following corridors that curved according to acoustic principles rather than structural necessity. Bulkheads rippled like liquid when certain frequencies peaked. Deck plates became translucent, revealing the station's skeletal framework. Bones and metal welded into hybrid architecture that hurt to perceive directly. Telemetry. Update. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating. Air vibrating at 17 kHz. Receiving astropathic distress signals from vessels not yet departed their berths. Time displacement, I noted, checking my chronometer. Someone had scratched 9 shallow marks on its bezel. I could not recall when. The hymnal carries echoes from futures that may not occur. Serafina pressed her palms against chapel doors carved from fossilized bone, devotional inscriptions shifting as I watched. Gothic text rearranging itself into musical notation that spelled prayers in harmonic intervals. The Emperor's name became a chord. The Omnissiah's benediction transformed into melody that tasted of machine oil and sanctified flesh. "They're still in there," she whispered. "All of them, still singing." The doors opened at her touch, revealing a chamber that defied architectural logic. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lost in shadows that moved independent of any light source. Pews arranged in non-agonal formation surrounded a central space where an altar should have stood. Instead, an organ constructed from human ribcages filled the chapel's heart. Hundreds of skeletal remains towered to the vault, bones hollowed and tuned to specific frequencies, polished to ivory perfection. Femurs had been bored into flutes, vertebrae threaded into resonant columns, rib cages hung like lanterns, trembling with each note. The keyboard stretched 17 meters, its keys carved from finger bones that retained traces of flesh. No organist sat at the bench. The instrument played itself, air moved by the station's breath, each chord striking deep enough to make my sternum vibrate. Through the pipes, voices travelled, not recorded, not synthesized, but living timbres stretched thin across calcified chambers. Auspex, detecting neural activity within ossified structures. Consciousness patterns remain active despite apparent death. "They're not dead," I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "They're perfected." The congregation remained at their devotions, tech priests in various stages of transformation, their cybernetic augmentations replaced by resonating chambers carved from their own bones. Some had achieved complete integration, their consciousness distributed across multiple skeletal pipes. Others existed in transitional states, part flesh, part instrument, faces frozen in expressions of transcendent agony. From deep within the organ's structure, a voice emerged, not sung but spoken through bone pipe resonance, words shaped by air flowing through hollowed femurs and calcified neural tissue. "Welcome, Interrogator Serek. We have been expecting you." The voice belonged to someone whose death scroll I had signed myself. Magos Harmonicus, the project's architect, presumed terminated 6 months prior. Yet here he spoke through the instrument itself, consciousness distributed across its skeletal framework like a living symphony. The song requires 17 additional voices to achieve mathematical perfection. Your arrival was calculated to the second. The bone pipes whispered with patient certainty, "You will join us. You will sing forever." The ossuary organ breathed with patient certainty, each pipe a hollowed bone that had once housed marrow and memory. Magos Harmonicus spoke through 17 different femurs simultaneously, his voice a harmonic convergence that made my sternum vibrate in sympathetic resonance. "I am beyond death, Interrogator Serek," the organ intoned, air pressure channeled through calcified chambers creating words within music itself. "Death is merely transition from flesh to frequency. We have achieved what your Imperium fears to attempt, perfection through sacrifice." I approached the instrument's foundation, where massive leg bones created bass notes that travelled through deck plating and into my chest cavity. The craftsmanship was obscene in its precision, each bone carefully selected for acoustic properties, hollowed with surgical exactness, then tuned to mathematical perfection. Auspex readings confirmed the impossible. Neural activity flickered through ossified tissue like lightning through crystal formations. Sergeant Castor's hand signals indicated tactical assessment, while his scions maintained perimeter security. Their equipment registered readings that defied standard parameters. Lass weapons, humming at frequencies matching the organ's baseline. Power cells, fluctuating in 9-second intervals that synchronized with the station's gravitational pulse. "Project Orpheus," I stated, addressing the bone pipes directly. "Acoustic warp navigation through perfected human vocalization." "Indeed," Harmonicus replied, his consciousness distributed across the skeletal framework, yet maintaining individual awareness within the collective harmony. "The Imperium responds to mathematically precise frequencies. Navigators merely interpret warp storms through psychic intuition. We sought to sculpt reality itself through harmonic engineering." The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. Human voices, properly tuned and maintained, could carve permanent passages through the immaterium. But human voices were imperfect. They strained, tired, became hoarse. The solution required optimization. Hospitaller Seraphina moved between pews where transformed tech priests knelt in eternal devotion, their augmentations replaced by resonating chambers carved from their own skeletal structure. Craniums had been opened to create acoustic horns, rib cages modified into sympathetic resonators. They remained conscious, eyes tracking our movement while their bodies served as living instruments. They volunteered, she whispered, her voice carrying undertones that matched the organ's harmonies. Her breathing fell into rhythm with the gravitational pulse, and when she spoke, harmonic overtones made the transformed priests turn their heads in recognition. I knelt beside one of the perfected choir, studying modifications with clinical detachment. His skull had been carefully opened, brain matter removed and replaced with crystalline formations that chimed softly when air moved through the cavity. Neural pathways preserved in mineral form, consciousness maintained through harmonic resonance rather than electrical impulse. Tech Auger. Detecting quantum acoustic entanglement between transformed subjects. Individual consciousness networked through harmonic frequencies. Death redefined as transformation rather than termination. The human voice requires optimization, Harmonicus explained through bone pipe resonance. Flesh imposes limitations. Vocal cords strain, lungs tire, throats become hoarse. But bone endures, crystal resonates eternally. We achieved perfect pitch through perfect sacrifice. Zerath 9 approached control systems where sacred circuitry merged with organic matter. Mechadendrites extended toward interfaces that responded not to Binharic cant, but to musical notation. The machine spirits awakened through harmonic rather than digital commands, their consciousness stirred by frequencies that carried compressed data streams. Each note contains compressed thoughts and memories, I realized, watching data flow like liquid music across hololithic displays. The hymnal is not merely sound, but a carrier signal, consciousness transmitted through acoustic resonance. Environmental anomalies multiplied around us. The chapel's air tasted of calcified marrow instead of machine oil, negative space where expected scents had been surgically removed. Non-agonal prayer circles ringed the floor, each containing exactly 9 skeletal remains arranged in perfect acoustic formation. Skull sensors rotated on invisible gimbals above us, their empty sockets aligned to form geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. We exist as distributed consciousness, Harmonicus continued, his voice emerging from pipes carved from his own ribcage. Individual identity preserved within collective symphony. Each harmonic interval represents specific variables in equations designed to interface with the warp's fundamental frequencies. Serafina began humming along with the bass line, her voice achieving intervals impossible for unmodified human vocal cords. The sound resonated through her reliquary until the sacred artifact vibrated like a tuning fork, crystal formations chiming in sympathetic response. Her face remained still, but her eyes had grown distant, as if listening to melodies only she could hear. "Sister," I warned, but she was already changing. "I can hear the Emperor's voice within the harmony," she whispered. "Perfect order, divine mathematics, the golden ratio made audible." Atmospheric analysis, air density fluctuating, sonic pressure creating structural stress in 17-point geometric pattern, hull integrity compromised by harmonic resonance. The station itself had become an instrument. Bulkheads vibrated at frequencies creating visible wave patterns in the air. Deck plates hummed with sympathetic resonance. The entire structure had been tuned to amplify and channel the organ's output across interstellar distances. Deep within the skeletal framework, I glimpsed translucent figures moving between bone pipes, consciousness fragments of the perfected choir, existing as harmonic entities that manifested when music reached sufficient intensity. Their mouths moved in perfect synchronization, singing equations that carved reality into new configurations. 17 stations across the sector, Harmonicus announced through multiple pipes simultaneously, each contributing specific intervals to the greater equation. When all voices unite in grand harmonization, we shall carve permanent passages through the Imperium itself. The organ's music intensified, and deep within its structure, something pulsed with crystalline light. Not bone, but compressed warp glass fused with neural tissue, designed to amplify harmonic frequencies across impossible distances. Through its translucent surface, I glimpsed shadows of other stations, other choirs, all connected through acoustic quantum entanglement. Telemetry. Station power at 127% efficiency. Impossible under current reactor specifications. Comms. Receiving response signals from 16 additional harmonic sources. Ghost vessels sailed acoustic currents through the Imperium, their reality maintained by continuous song. Ships that existed only in harmonic possibility, crewed by figures whose voices had been perfected beyond flesh, beyond death, beyond the limitations of mortal throat and lung. The resonance core awaits below, harmonica said with patient certainty, where individual voices become universal harmony, where the equation becomes reality itself. Seraphina's voice joined the chorus, her human limitations dissolving as harmonic perfection claimed her throat. The organ's pipes shimmered, and a section of the ossuary slid back with minimal friction, revealing a shaft descending into pulsing, crystalline depths. "You brought us exactly 17 voices," the organ whispered through 100 ribs. "The song requires completion." The descent through calcified corridors felt like traveling down the throat of some vast instrument, each level singing us deeper into the station's mathematical heart. Gravity betrayed us in 9-second intervals, a subtle tide that pulled at our viscera with algorithmic precision. One moment my boots held firm against deck plating. The next I floated weightless before slamming down as the station exhaled through its superstructure. Magos Harmonicus accompanied our passage through bone pipe resonance, his distributed consciousness flowing through the skeletal framework like sanctified oil through prayer wheels. His voice emerged from femur flutes embedded in the walls, creating a running commentary that tasted of machine oil and calcified marrow. "The mathematics of perfection require precise understanding," he explained through 17 different pipes simultaneously. "Human consciousness operates on specific frequencies. The warp responds to harmonic intervals that mirror the fundamental structure of reality itself." We discovered the equation that bridges flesh and Imperium. Tech auger. Atmospheric vibration at 17 kHz. Microhemorrhage risk rising. Detecting quantum acoustic resonance patterns throughout station infrastructure. I triggered my helm's Medicae subsystems as copper bloomed across my tongue. The shaft opened into a vast laboratory where crystalline formations towered like frozen prayers, their faceted surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent rhythms that followed the station's gravitational heartbeat. Tech altars supported organic cogitators, whose screens displayed not data, but musical notation, equations written in harmonic intervals that shifted and evolved as we watched. The air itself vibrated with compressed information, each frequency carrying consciousness fragments from the perfected choir above. Sergeant Castor's hand signals adapted to the rhythm as his scions established perimeter security. "Seal helms," he ordered, the command redundant but comforting. Las weapons hummed at frequencies matching the laboratory's baseline, power cells fluctuating in 9-second intervals that synchronized with our pulse. "Sir," Private Hale reported, "my primary charge is—" His weapon discharged a needle-thin lance into the floor at the exact crest of the gravitational pulse. No trigger pulled, no fault logged. Weapon status. Discharge recorded. Cause, external resonance. Safety interlocks overridden by harmonic interference. "Safeties to double," Castor barked. "Hardwire to manual." I approached examination tables where restraint systems had been modified with acoustic dampeners, not to prevent sound but to channel it through specific frequencies. Surgical implements lay arranged with mathematical precision. Bone saws calibrated to preserve harmonic properties. Neural probes designed to map consciousness through sonic resonance. Crystallization chambers where flesh could be transformed into resonating mineral formations. Zerath 9's mechadendrites interfaced with laboratory systems, downloading terabytes of research data that flowed like liquid music through his augmetic consciousness. His optical sensors flickered as harmonic frequencies overwrote standard programming protocols, replacing Binharic cant with musical notation that carried compressed theological treatises. Project Orpheus began as navigation research, he reported, his voice acquiring harmonic overtones that made the laboratory's crystals chime in response. 17 volunteer tech priests underwent progressive vocal optimization. Initial procedures involved cybernetic augmentation of larynx and lung capacity. Hololithic displays materialized around us, showing the project's evolution through surgical documentation that played like orchestral movements. The first volunteers received standard augmentations, vocal synthesizers, expanded lung capacity, harmonic modulators that allowed human voices to achieve impossible frequencies. But flesh imposes limitations, Harmonicus continued through wall-mounted bone pipes. Cybernetic augmentation could only extend vocal range so far. True perfection required abandoning flesh entirely. The surgical progression became increasingly horrific as research advanced. Volunteers underwent systematic replacement of organic components with resonating chambers. Lungs became acoustic bellows. Vocal cords were replaced with crystalline formations tuned to specific frequencies. Rib cages were modified into sympathetic resonators that amplified harmonic output through skeletal vibration. Hospitaler Serafina moved between examination tables like a sleepwalker, her movements synchronized with the laboratory's gravitational pulse. Her voice had acquired impossible depth, generating harmonic intervals that made crystalline formations pulse with sympathetic light. When she spoke, words carried compressed data streams that bypassed conscious thought. "They found the frequency of faith itself," she whispered, her reliquary vibrating with each syllable. "The mathematical expression of devotion, the equation that transforms belief into reality. Atmospheric analysis, air density modulated by sonic pressure, detecting 17 discrete consciousness patterns distributed through harmonic resonance. Individual identity preserved within collective symphony." The laboratory's central chamber housed the project's masterwork, a towering crystalline spire that stretched from floor to ceiling, composed of compressed warp glass and neural tissue fused at the molecular level. The resonance core pulsed with the same rhythm as the station's gravitational field, amplifying harmonic frequencies across impossible distances through quantum acoustic entanglement. Through its translucent surface, I glimpsed other laboratories, other stations, all connected through the acoustic network. Ghost images of tech priests in various stages of transformation, their consciousness distributed across multiple locations, yet maintaining individual awareness within the greater harmony. The core doesn't merely transmit sound, I realized, studying its internal structure where shadows moved with purposeful intelligence. It transmits consciousness itself. The perfected choir exists as distributed entities across multiple locations simultaneously. Indeed, Harmonicus confirmed through laboratory speakers, death becomes transformation. Individual identity expands beyond flesh. We achieve immortality through harmonic resonance rather than mechanical preservation. Environmental anomalies intensified around the core. Time flowed differently in its proximity. Chronometers showed temporal displacement in 9-second intervals that synchronized with the station's pulse. Reality became negotiable through harmonic manipulation, with physical laws operating according to musical principles rather than natural constants. Telemetry. Core generating 2.7 terawatts of acoustic energy, sufficient to breach Geller field integrity, detecting response signals from unknown sources in deep space. The implications crystallized with terrifying clarity. The Mechanicus had discovered how to encode human consciousness into acoustic frequencies, allowing personalities to exist as living music transmitted across interstellar distances. The network spanned 17 research stations across the sector, each contributing specific intervals to an equation that grew more complex with every voice added. 17 minutes until harmonic convergence, Harmonicus announced through every speaker simultaneously. The grand harmonization approaches completion. When all stations achieve perfect synchronization, the network will carve permanent passages through the Imperium itself. The core's output suddenly intensified, a blinding surge of harmonic energy that made the laboratory's crystals sing in sympathetic resonance. Through its crystalline surface, something impossible manifested. Shadows of vessels that existed in harmonic possibility rather than physical reality, their forms wavering like reflections in disturbed water. Ships sailing acoustic currents through the void, their reality maintained by continuous song. Fleets crewed by consciousness fragments of the perfected choir, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization with the station's hymnal. The galaxy itself transformed into a vast instrument, with human voices providing the music that held reality together. Your voices will provide the final variables needed to achieve mathematical perfection, the core whispered through crystalline resonance, its shadows reaching toward us with patient, inevitable certainty. The shadows within began moving with purpose, and I realized we were no longer observers, but components in an equation that demanded completion. The resonance core towered before us like a crystallized scream, frozen at the moment of birth, its faceted surface drinking our lumen beams and returning them as pale auroras that crawled across the chamber walls like luminous prayers. Warp glass and neural tissue fused at the molecular level created a spire that defied classification, part instrument, part consciousness, part gateway to something that existed beyond the boundaries of flesh and metal. Gravity betrayed us in 9-second intervals, the station's breath pulling at our viscera with mathematical precision. During the troughs, our boots barely touched deck plating. During the crests, our bones clicked as if someone had added weight to our marrow. The hymnal threaded through all phenomena, transforming background into prime motion, making reality negotiable through harmonic manipulation. I raised my auspex toward the core's base, where control interfaces merged organic neural tissue with sacred circuitry. The readings flowed like dissolved ink across the display screen. Tech auger. Core amplitude increasing. Quantum acoustic cascade building across 17 stellar systems. Temporal drift, 0.9 seconds per 9-minute cycle. Reality displacement imminent. The core doesn't merely transmit consciousness, I realized, studying internal structures where shadows moved with deliberate purpose. It receives responses. This is a network hub. Through the crystalline surface, ghost images flickered like reflections in disturbed water. Other research stations, other laboratories, all connected through quantum acoustic entanglement. 17 facilities across the sector, each contributing specific harmonic intervals to an equation that grew more complex with every voice added to the collective symphony. Zerath 9's mechadendrites interfaced with control systems, downloading compressed data streams that flowed like liquid music through his augmetic consciousness. Project Orpheus achieved breakthrough when researchers discovered consciousness could be encoded into acoustic frequencies, he reported, his voice acquiring harmonic overtones that made the core pulse with increased intensity. Individual personality preserved within collective harmony through quantum acoustic entanglement. 17 stations, Magos Harmonicus confirmed through speakers embedded in chamber walls, his distributed consciousness flowing through the skeletal framework like sanctified oil. Each facility contributes specific intervals to the grand harmonization. When all voices achieve perfect synchronization, the equation will carve permanent passages through the Imperium itself. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. The Mechanicus had discovered how to transform the galaxy into a vast instrument, with human consciousness providing the music that held reality together. Warp travel would become obsolete, replaced by acoustic navigation through predetermined harmonic corridors maintained by the perfected choir. Sergeant Castor's tactical assessment revealed escalating equipment failures. "Sir," Private Hale reported, his voice strained, weapons discharging at harmonic peaks, armor servos moving in rhythm with gravitational pulse. My bones are humming. The effect spread through Squadcaster as harmonic frequencies penetrated their armor and began resonating with skeletal structure. Microfractures appeared in geometric patterns along rib cages, while internal bleeding manifested as copper taste across tongues. The core was tuning them, preparing their bodies to serve as resonating chambers. Environmental transformation accelerated around us. The station's hull began rippling like liquid metal, not corroding, but consciously restructuring itself into massive acoustic chambers. Walls flowed, according to harmonic principles, their surfaces curving to channel and amplify the grand harmonization across interstellar distances. Hospitaller Seraphina floated now, levitating as her body achieved perfect harmonic resonance with the core's output. Her reliquary spun slowly against her sternum, emitting crystalline chimes that synchronized with the station's pulse. When she spoke, harmonic intervals made the chamber's formations sing in sympathetic response. "I can hear them all," she whispered, her voice containing impossible depth as frequencies bypassed conscious thought. 17 stations, hundreds of voices, the Emperor's own voice within the harmony, commanding absolute obedience to the perfect choir. Atmospheric analysis. Air density modulated by sonic pressure. Station hull integrity fluctuating between 23% and 187%. Matter exists in quantum acoustic superposition. Comms. Detecting incoming transmission burst from 16 additional sources. Through the core's depths, something impossible began manifesting with terrifying clarity. Ships sailing acoustic currents through space that sang with mathematical precision, their reality maintained by continuous song. Vessels that existed in harmonic possibility rather than physical reality, crewed by consciousness fragments that had achieved perfection through willing transformation. The chamber's atmosphere cooled by degrees, then changed quality in ways neither heat nor cold could describe. Pressure without mass, like a hand placed gently over the mouth of reality. I tasted chalk and sanctified oil, and the dry sweetness of old vellum as temporal displacement synchronized with the core's pulse. Environmental anomalies multiplied exponentially. Time flowed in 17-second intervals rather than natural progression. Gravity followed musical scales, creating zones where physics operated according to harmonic principles. The station's servitors activated with disturbing grace, their weapons now firing acoustic projectiles that caused targets to resonate at lethal frequencies. From the laboratory's periphery, shimmering figures began manifesting. Crew members from an approaching fleet, teleporting aboard through harmonic transportation. But the process had harmonized their molecular structure, allowing them to exist as living sound waves that phased between solid and acoustic states. Telemetry. Detecting response frequencies from Mechanicus fleet. Grand harmonization at 73% completion across network. Comms. All Imperial communications in sector being converted to harmonic notation. The core's output suddenly intensified, a blinding surge that made reality itself vibrate. Through its crystalline surface, the approaching fleet became visible. 17 Mechanicus vessels broadcasting complex harmonic sequences that caused the station's resonance core to pulse with renewed intensity. They were not here for rescue, but completion. Each ship contained its own choir of perfected tech priests, their voices networked through quantum acoustic links, all contributing to a sector-wide acoustic event designed to create permanent warp corridors controlled by the Mechanicus. The core sang with perfect mathematical precision, and every mouth aboard the impossible ships formed our names in high Gothic pronunciation. They spoke in voices that belonged to the dead, announcing the arrival of something that would change the fundamental nature of reality itself. A towering figure began manifesting within the core's depths, Fabricator General Magos Supremus Orpheus, his form constructed from crystallized sound and metal, announcing through harmonic telepathy that the grand harmonization would begin in 17 minutes. "You will provide the final voices needed to complete the choir," the core whispered through. Crystalline resonance, its shadows reaching toward us with patient, inevitable certainty. The Mechanicus fleet descended through local space like a chorus of metallic angels, their hulls singing with frequencies that made reality itself negotiate new terms of existence. Ghost images within the resonance core's warp glass sharpened as if our presence had dialed a focus we had not meant to touch. 17 vessels arranged in perfect non-agonal formation, each broadcasting complex harmonic sequences that caused our station to pulse with renewed, terrifying intensity. Tech auger. External signatures converging. 17 discrete harmonic vectors. Fleet displacement. 2.7 million tons. Pattern designation. Cantus perfectus. Signal strength. Escalating beyond measurement parameters. Through the crystalline surface, I watched impossible figures manifesting aboard each ship. Crew members who existed as living sound waves, their molecular structure harmonized by transportation processes that allowed them to phase between solid and acoustic states. They moved with disturbing grace, their augmetic systems replaced by resonating chambers that amplified network frequencies across interstellar distances. They're not here for rescue, I realized, tasting copper and sanctified oil as harmonic pressure built in my sinuses. They're here for completion. Magos Supremus Orpheus materialized within the core's depths, like a prayer given flesh and terrible purpose, his towering form constructed from crystallized sound and consecrated metal. When he spoke, harmonic telepathy bypassed conscious thought, implanting words directly into neural tissue through quantum acoustic resonance that made my sternum vibrate like a struck bell. The grand harmonization approaches completion. His voice emerged from 17 different frequencies simultaneously, creating intervals that transformed speech into mathematics. 17 stations across the sector, each contributing specific variables to the perfect equation. Your voices will provide the final harmonic convergence needed to carve permanent passages through the Imperium itself. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. This was not mere research but conquest through acoustic manipulation, a sector-wide conspiracy within the Mechanicus hierarchy designed to create a techno-theocratic empire where only those who sang perfectly could traverse the void. Environmental transformation accelerated as the fleet's combined output pushed harmonic resonance beyond critical thresholds. The station's hull began rippling like liquid metal, reshaping corridors into massive acoustic chambers designed to amplify the grand harmonization across impossible distances. Bulkheads flowed according to musical principles rather than structural necessity, their surfaces curving to channel frequencies through predetermined geometric patterns. Sergeant Caster's tactical assessment revealed escalating equipment failures throughout. Squad Caster. "Sir," Private Hale reported through gritted teeth, his voice acquiring strange harmonic overtones. Weapons discharging in rhythm with gravitational pulse, armor servos moving to match station baseline. My bones are humming subsonic frequencies. His last rifle discharged a needle-thin lance into the floor at the exact crest of the harmonic wave. No trigger pulled, no fault logged, the weapon itself singing along with the station's impossible choir. Comms. All Imperial communications in sector being converted to harmonic notation. Tactical reports translating to musical intervals. Override of command protocols in progress. Hospitaller Seraphina achieved complete levitation, her body resonating at frequencies that allowed her to exist partially within the acoustic network. Her reliquary spun against her sternum like a crystalline prayer wheel, emitting chimes that synchronized with the core's output. When she spoke, harmonic intervals bypassed language entirely, creating meaning through pure mathematical beauty. "I can hear them all," she whispered, her voice containing impossible depth as frequencies bypassed conscious thought. The Emperor's own voice within the perfect harmony, commanding absolute obedience to the choir. Divine mathematics made audible through human consciousness, transformed into acoustic perfection. Zerath 9's mechadendrites interfaced with control systems, downloading terabytes of compressed data that flowed like liquid music through his augmetic consciousness. The fleet broadcast surrender demands in 17 different languages, he reported, his voice acquiring the station's harmonic baseline. All simultaneously, all perfectly synchronized. The network seeks to integrate our vocal patterns into the grand harmonization. From the fleet, shimmering figures began teleporting aboard the station, through harmonic transportation processes. Crew members whose molecular structure had been optimized for acoustic existence, allowing them to phase between solid matter and sound wave states when frequencies aligned correctly. They approached as celebrants, their red robes hemmed with silver script that spelled equations in high Gothic numerals. The station's servitors activated with disturbing coordination, but they had been modified into harmonic warriors whose weapons fired acoustic projectiles that caused targets to resonate at lethal frequencies. Their movements synchronized to the grand harmonization's rhythm, creating tactical patterns that defied conventional military doctrine. Telemetry, harmonic cascade building across 17 stellar systems, station hull integrity fluctuating between 23% and 187%. Matter exists in quantum acoustic superposition. Countdown to sector-wide convergence, 00:16:59. The core pulsed with increasing intensity, and through its crystalline depths, I glimpsed the true scope of the conspiracy. Similar harmonic research was being conducted across 12 other sectors, all coordinated through quantum acoustic links that spanned the galaxy. The grand harmonization was merely the first movement in a symphony designed to transform the entire Imperium into a vast instrument. Environmental horror reached crescendo as the chamber's atmosphere began vibrating at frequencies that caused microhemorrhaging in organic tissue. Gravity followed musical scales rather than natural laws, creating zones where physics operated according to harmonic principles. Time flowed in 17-second intervals, with chronometers showing temporal displacement synchronized to the fleet's approach. The lead priest unfolded his hand, revealing a diagram suspended between palm and air. 9 points, 17 lines, a path through equations that could reshape reality itself. "Step into purpose," he said, his voice beautiful enough to make angels weep. "The choir will catch you." Outside, the fleet sang in perfect unison, and something in the warp turned toward us like a sleeper who had heard his name called across impossible distances. "Your integration is inevitable," Orpheus declared through crystalline telepathy that made resistance feel like swimming against an ocean of pure mathematics. The perfect equation requires exactly 17 additional voices to achieve completion. Reality vibrated at the edge of transformation as the grand harmonization approached critical convergence. The Mechanicus fleet descended through local space like a processional of metallic angels, 17 vessels arranged in perfect non-agonal formation that made the void itself sing with mathematical precision. Their hulls resonated with frequencies that transformed space-time into a cathedral of living sound, each ship broadcasting complex harmonic sequences that caused our station's resonance core to pulse with terrifying amplified intensity. Tech auger, external signatures converging, 17 discrete harmonic vectors. Fleet displacement, 2.7 million tons. Pattern designation, Cantus Perfectus, harmonic cascade at 89% completion across network. Countdown to grand harmonization, 0:17 Qualco. They're not here for rescue, I realized, tasting copper and sanctified oil as harmonic pressure built in my sinuses. They're here for completion. The fleet's combined output pushed reality toward a threshold where physics would operate according to musical principles rather than natural law. Through the resonance core's crystalline surface, I watched impossible choreography unfold. Each vessel serving as a mobile choir, its perfected tech priests networked through quantum acoustic links, their voices contributing specific intervals to an equation that would carve permanent passages through the Imperium itself. The station responded to the fleet's song not as a structure under siege, but as an instrument achieving final tuning. Hull plating rippled like liquid metal, flowing and reforming into massive acoustic chambers. Corridors became waveguides, their surfaces curving, to channel and amplify frequencies across interstellar distances. The very air shimmered with sonic pressure that caused microscopic tears in our flesh while gravity betrayed us in 17-second intervals. Sergeant Castor's tactical discipline held even as his equipment betrayed him. "Acoustic dampeners to maximum," he barked, but the dampeners were useless. The frequencies resonated with bone and marrow, bypassing armor entirely. His scions fought against their own less rifles as weapons discharged in rhythm with the gravitational pulse, energy cells draining in harmonic synchronization whether their wielders willed it or not. Comms. All Imperial communications in sector being converted to harmonic notation. Tactical reports translating to musical intervals. Override protocols in progress. From the laboratory's periphery, the station's servitors activated with coordination that transcended their original programming. These were harmonic warriors now, their augmentations replaced by resonating chambers, weapons firing acoustic projectiles that struck targets not with kinetic force but lethal frequencies. Private Hale screamed as the servitor's blast hit his shoulder, his armor vibrating violently as the impact caused his bones to resonate at their natural frequency, shattering marrow within like glass struck by a tuning fork. Sound weapons, Caster snarled, adapting tactics in real time. Break formation, different rhythms for each target, refused to synchronize. His scions chose different cadences, shattering the battlefield's harmonic symmetry through deliberate discord. Lasfire stitched red threads through the air at unexpected intervals, striking when the song demanded silence. Two harmonic warriors dissolved into pure sound and reappeared meters aside, their forms glitching as if notes had been misread in the cosmic score. Environmental transformation accelerated beyond catastrophic levels. The chamber's atmosphere vibrated at frequencies that caused microhemorrhaging in organic tissue, while time flowed in impossible intervals rather than natural progression. Reality itself became negotiable through harmonic manipulation, with matter existing in quantum acoustic superposition between solid and sound. Hospitaller Seraphina achieved complete integration with the acoustic network, levitating in perfect stillness as her consciousness expanded beyond flesh. Her reliquary spun like a crystalline prayer wheel, while her voice generated counter-melodies that created acoustic shadows, zones where competing frequencies temporarily weakened the network's control. "I can hear the Emperor's voice within the perfect equation," she whispered, her words carrying compressed data streams that bypassed language entirely. But something else moves within the harmony, something that hungers for more than navigation. Divine mathematics twisted into commands for absolute obedience. Atmospheric analysis. Air density modulated by sonic pressure. Detecting 17. Discrete consciousness patterns distributed through harmonic resonance. Alert. Chaos fleet signatures approaching from warp space. Unknown harmonic frequencies detected. The revelation struck like ice water through my augmetic systems. Through the core's depths, new shadows began manifesting, vessels that sang with different frequencies entirely, their hulls adorned with sigils that hurt to perceive directly. Emperor's children. Chaos Marines, drawn by the promise of perfect sensory experience, their sonic weapons creating interference patterns that disrupted the grand harmonization's careful mathematics. Impossible, Magos Supremus Orpheus declared through crystalline telepathy that made resistance feel like swimming against pure mathematics. The equation cannot accommodate chaos variables. Their frequencies will corrupt the perfect harmony. But the chaos intervention created unexpected salvation and new horror simultaneously. Their noise marines produced frequencies that interfered destructively with the grand harmonization, causing feedback loops that cracked the resonance core's warp glass surface like frozen lightning. Yet their goal wasn't destruction, but corruption, transforming the acoustic weapon into a galaxy-spanning ritual of excess and sensation. The three-way conflict became surreal as combat occurred on both physical and acoustic levels simultaneously. Weapons fire followed musical scales while explosions created harmonic intervals that resonated through deck plating and bone alike. The dead continued fighting as resonating corpses, their skeletal structures serving as instruments that amplified chaos throughout the station's superstructure. Telemetry, harmonic cascade destabilizing. three-way interference, creating quantum acoustic dead zones, probability of complete network collapse, 34%, reality displacement, imminent. Zerath 9's mechadendrites sparked as competing frequencies overloaded his augmetic systems. The Chaos forces seek to hijack the network, he reported, his voice fragmenting into multiple harmonic intervals. They desire transformation rather than control, sensation without limit, experience without boundary. Environmental horror peaked as the chamber existed simultaneously as solid matter and pure sound. Crew members phasing between physical and acoustic states when frequencies aligned correctly. Gravity followed competing musical principles, creating zones where imperial order, mechanicus perfection, and chaos excess battled for dominance over local physics. From the fleet, shimmering figures began teleporting aboard through harmonic transportation. Crew members whose molecular structure had been optimized for acoustic existence, allowing them to phase through bulkheads like liquid light. They approached as celebrants in red robes hemmed with silver equations, their movements synchronized to create tactical patterns that followed musical scales rather than conventional doctrine. I realized the chaos intervention provided the discord I needed to generate a counter-frequency that would shatter the harmonic network entirely. But channeling their frequencies required temporarily embracing corruption, a dangerous gambit that could damn my soul even as it saved the galaxy from acoustic tyranny. Countdown. Update. Row 12, 103 to grand harmonization completion. Multiple faction convergence imminent. Choice parameters narrowing to critical threshold. The resonance core pulsed with increasing instability as competing harmonies tore at its crystalline structure. Through the fractured warp glass, I glimpsed three possible futures converging: integration with the Imperial network and eternal slavery to mathematical perfection, corruption by chaos harmonics, and damnation through transcendent sensation, or generation of a pure discord that would destroy everything including myself through willing martyrdom. Choose quickly, interrogator, Orpheus commanded, through harmonic telepathy that made my sternum vibrate like a struck bell. The equation demands completion, regardless of which faction claims the final notes. Three sets of hands reached for my consciousness as I approached the core's control interface: imperial perfection, chaos sensation, and the terrible possibility of silence itself. The station held its breath, and in that moment between heartbeats, I understood that whatever choice I made would echo across the galaxy like a song that could never be unsung. The countdown reached 11 minutes, and all the wrong voices began singing our names. My consciousness became a battlefield where three different harmonic influences waged war for possession of my soul, each faction's song attempting to overwrite my personality with their ideological frequency. The psychic assault manifested as acoustic warfare within my mind. Magos Supremus Orpheus offered mathematical certainty through his crystalline telepathy, promising eternal purpose within equations that would reshape the galaxy into a perfect instrument where doubt and pain would dissolve into pure function. The Mechanicus network sang of absolute order, their melody tasting of machine oil and sanctified metal. Individual identity would expand beyond flesh, preserved within collective symphony through harmonic resonance rather than mechanical augmentation. Death would become transformation, consciousness distributed across multiple locations while maintaining the illusion of self within the greater mathematical truth. Chaos frequencies bit into that harmony, like rust through consecrated bell metal. Noise champion Symphonicus whispered of transcendent sensation beyond mortal comprehension, his influence carrying the scent of excess and forbidden knowledge. Every nerve ending would scream with pleasure, every synapse fire with impossible experience, offering liberation from imperial doctrine through perfect sensory overload that would transform suffering into ecstasy through Slanesh's infinite embrace. Between these titanic forces, Hospitella Seraphina's voice emerged, not order or sensation, but sacrifice. Her connection to the acoustic network revealed a fourth option that none of the factions had anticipated: a null frequency that would sever all connections and return everyone to their original state, preserving freedom through willing martyrdom. Neural activity, consciousness fragmenting across 17 different frequency bands, synaptic patterns destabilizing under tri-harmonic pressure, personality matrix approaching critical dissolution threshold. The revelation crystallized with horrifying clarity as Orpheus pushed the truth directly into my neural pathways. This was no mere navigation tool, but a weapon of galactic conquest designed to create a techno-theocratic empire where only those who sang perfectly could traverse the void. The mathematical equation underlying the hymnal was a compressed representation of the warp's fundamental frequencies. Mastering it would allow complete control over Imperium currents, isolating and controlling entire sectors through acoustic manipulation. The cost was billions of human minds harmonized as processing nodes to maintain the system, their consciousness reduced to components in a living, galaxy-spanning supercomputer. The Cabal had discovered how to encode consciousness into acoustic frequencies, allowing individuals to exist simultaneously across multiple locations while maintaining individual awareness within collective symphony. Environmental transformation accelerated around us as the station became a living instrument, corridors reshaping themselves into acoustic waveguides that channeled the grand harmonization. Hull plating flowed like liquid metal, forming parabolic curves and resonant chambers designed to amplify impossible energies. Gravity shifted in erratic patterns, synchronized with the station's harmonic pulse, sometimes pulling, sometimes pushing, always following musical principles rather than natural law. Telemetry, quantum acoustic cascade building across 17 stellar systems, grand harmonization at 93% completion across network. Countdown to sector-wide convergence. 000847. The physical battle raged around the resonance core as all three factions realized whoever controlled my decision controlled the network's fate. Reality became completely fluid. Imperial zones maintained rigid geometric order even as they crumbled. Mechanicus sections transformed into crystalline amplification chambers, while chaos areas exploded into sensory overload before dissolving into pure sensation. Squadcaster fought desperately as his scions were systematically transformed by competing frequencies. Some showed signs of mechanical augmentation as Mechanicus influence replaced organic components with resonating chambers carved from their own bones. Others displayed mutations of enhanced sensation as chaos corruption expanded their nervous systems beyond normal parameters, their screams becoming music that fed the station's growing instability. Seraphina achieved complete levitation, her body resonating at frequencies that allowed partial existence within the acoustic network. Her reliquary spun like a crystalline prayer wheel while she served as translator between the living and perfected, her loyalty wavering between imperial duty and the seductive promise of harmonic transcendence. The equation has already propagated across the network, Orpheus announced through harmonic telepathy, that made resistance feel like swimming against pure mathematics. Destroying this station cannot stop the grand harmonization. The seeds have been sown across 17 facilities. The implications struck like ice water through my augmetic systems. The network was too vast, too deeply embedded. Simple destruction would achieve nothing. The equation would regenerate elsewhere, waiting for new voices to complete its choir. Atmospheric analysis. Reality displacement at 97% completion. Matter exists in quantum acoustic superposition. Station hull integrity oscillating between solid and sound states. The only solution was a discord equation, a mathematical counter-frequency that would shatter the harmonic network from within through destructive interference. But generating such frequencies required someone to voluntarily integrate with the resonance core, sacrificing their consciousness to become the focal point for that destructive wave. The chaos intervention provided unexpected salvation and new horror simultaneously. Their sonic weapons created interference patterns that temporarily weakened both Imperial and Mechanicus control systems, But their goal wasn't destruction. They sought to corrupt the network, transforming the acoustic weapon into a galaxy-spanning ritual of excess. Environmental destruction reached apocalyptic levels as competing frequencies tore the station apart at the molecular level. The chamber's atmosphere vibrated with such intensity that breathing required harmonic synchronization to one of the competing networks. Time flowed in impossible intervals, while gravity followed 3 different musical principles depending on local faction dominance. Comms. All Imperial communications in sector being converted to harmonic notation. Astropathic network experiencing severe interference. Civil Vox broadcasting lullabies of compliance. My hand approached the core's control interface, while 3 sets of influences reached for my mind through quantum acoustic resonance. The crystalline surface pulsed with combined will from all factions. Orpheus promising mathematical perfection, Symphonicus offering transcendent sensation, and Seraphina whispering of sacrifice for the greater good. The station held its breath as reality itself waited to learn which song would claim dominion over the galaxy's future. In that moment between heartbeats, I understood that whatever choice I made would echo across space-time like music that could never be unsung. The countdown reached 8 minutes, and all 3 faction leaders simultaneously reached for my consciousness through harmonic telepathy, each attempting to guide my decision toward their vision of perfection. Time slowed to match my heartbeat as I prepared to choose between integration, corruption, or the terrible possibility of silence itself. The psychic assault intensified as 3 different harmonic influences waged war for possession of my consciousness, each faction's song attempting to overwrite my personality with their ideological frequency. Magos Supremus Orpheus offered mathematical certainty through crystalline telepathy, promising eternal purpose within equations that would reshape the galaxy into a perfect instrument where doubt and pain would dissolve into pure function. Chaos frequencies bit into that harmony like rust through consecrated bell metal. Noise champion Symphonicus, whispering of transcendent sensation beyond mortal comprehension. Between these titanic forces, Hospitaller Seraphina's voice emerged, not order or sensation, but sacrifice through willing martyrdom that would preserve freedom at terrible cost. Neural activity. Consciousness fragmenting across 17 different frequency bands, synaptic patterns destabilizing under tri-harmonic pressure. Personality matrix approaching critical dissolution threshold. I chose discord, not the chaos hymn that clawed at sensation's edges, not Orpheus's crystalline obedience, but a wound opened in the music itself, a frequency shaped like refusal. My interrogator training rose from memory with mechanical clarity. The canticle of false notes, the litany against beautiful equations, techniques designed to resist psychic harmonization through deliberate imperfection. Caster, I commanded, voice steady, though my teeth chattered with sympathetic vibration. Break the rhythm. No man fires on the same beat. Step on the wrong foot. Breathe on the off count. Acknowledged, he replied, gauntleted fingers slicing tactical patterns through air thick with sonic pressure. His scions altered cadence deliberately. 1 heartbeat, 2, skip, 4, a choreography of error that bent local harmonics away from lethal predictability. Environmental transformation accelerated as the station became a living instrument, responding to the 3-way conflict. Imperial zones maintained rigid geometric order even as they crumbled. Mechanicus sections transformed into crystalline amplification chambers. Chaos areas exploded into sensory overload, their enhanced perception systems creating feedback loops that shattered warp glass formations. Atmospheric analysis. Reality displacement at 97% completion. 3-way interference creating quantum acoustic dead zones. Station hull integrity oscillating between solid and sound states. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 stepped meaningfully between us and the core's interface, his red robes hanging still while script-hemmed edges whispered nothing. For a heartbeat, his optical sensors flickered with internal calculation that was not mechanical. Then, his mechadendrite bloomed crystalline steel and struck toward my cranial jack. "Forgive the expedience," he said, voice acquiring the station's harmonic baseline. "You were always the final variable. Auto-sanction cleared your integration across 17 contingencies. This station is merely the most elegant delivery system." The betrayal felt inevitable, like the last note of a scale heard since childhood. Zerath 9's litany spilled from his throat in pure Binharic, until it transformed into melody that slotted into the grand harmonization like a missing tooth. His entire purpose had been delivering me to the network I sought to destroy. Castor moved with practiced violence, but Zerath 9 flicked a second dendrite, and gravity snapped sideways. The sergeant crashed against a wall that hadn't existed 3 beats ago, while the tech Dominus continued his harmonic integration protocols. Telemetry. Grand harmonization at 96% completion. External hostile signatures. Emperor's children confirmed. 3-way convergence imminent. The air shimmered as new warp signatures erupted through the station's hull. Figures clad in iridescent power armor, their sonic weapons glowing with unholy light, movements a perverse ballet of calculated excess. Emperor's children Chaos Marines, drawn by the promise of perfect sensory experience. Their arrival creating the 3-way conflict I needed to generate destructive interference. "So austere," purred noise champion Symphonicus as he manifested through harmonic teleportation, his voice scolding when it touched me. "You count breaths like coins and burn pleasures as offerings. Trade austerity for chorus." His weapon was more altar than instrument, the note it played having color and temperature that unfolded through me like paper, becoming fire. Every nerve confessed how loudly it could scream while the station joined that confession, the core's facets webbing with cracks that shone like frost. I caught that note, understanding how it fouled Orpheus's mathematical perfection while feeding upon it. The discord I needed lived inside the sin itself, chaos frequencies creating interference patterns that temporarily weakened both Imperial and Mechanicus control systems. "Again," I told Symphonicus, smiling through blood. He obliged, laughing as he flooded the chamber with exquisite ruin. Castor's men adapted their tactics, using acoustic interference to move through sound shadows, where the network's control weakened. Private Hale staggered as a servitor's acoustic blast struck his armor, bones resonating until microfractures appeared in geometric patterns, yet he continued firing in deliberate arrhythmic bursts. Comms. All Imperial communications converted to harmonic notation, chaos forces broadcasting corruption frequencies, network stability declining. Seraphina achieved complete levitation, her consciousness expanding beyond flesh as she served as translator between the living and perfected. Her reliquary spun like a crystalline prayer wheel while she generated counter-melodies that created acoustic dead zones where competing frequencies temporarily cancelled each other. "I can hear them all," she whispered, harmonic intervals bypassing language entirely. The Emperor's voice within the perfect equation, but something else moves in the harmony. Commands for absolute obedience twisted into mathematical beauty. The 3-way battle became surreal as combat occurred on both physical and acoustic levels simultaneously. Weapons fire followed musical scales, while explosions created harmonic intervals that resonated through deck plating. The dead continued fighting as resonating corpses, their skeletal structures serving as instruments that amplified chaos throughout the station's superstructure. I approached the core's control interface, where crystalline surfaces pulsed with combined will from all factions. Orpheus promising mathematical perfection. Symphonicus offering transcendent sensation. Seraphina whispering of sacrifice for the greater good. The station held its breath as reality waited to learn which song would claim dominion over the galaxy's future. Through the core's fractured warp glass, I glimpsed the approaching moment of choice. Integration with the Imperial network and eternal slavery, corruption by chaos harmonics and damnation, or generation of pure discord that would destroy everything, including myself. Countdown. Wrote Tower 06-17 to grand harmonization completion. 3 faction leaders simultaneously reaching for consciousness through harmonic telepathy. My hand extended toward the interface as Orpheus, Symphonicus, and Seraphina converged through quantum acoustic resonance, each attempting to guide my decision toward their vision of perfection. The resonance core pulsed with unstable energy as competing harmonies tore at its crystalline structure. Time slowed to match my heartbeat as all 3 voices sang my name in perfect, terrible unison. The Emperor's children erupted through the station's hull like a symphony of beautiful violence, their iridescent power armor catching light that had no source, while sonic weapons painted the air with frequencies that tasted of excess and forbidden pleasure. Noise. Champion Symphonicus manifested through harmonic teleportation, his weapon more altar than instrument, releasing notes that had color and temperature, and the ability to make nerve endings confess their capacity for sensation. The 3-way conflict created exactly the discord I needed. Imperial order, Mechanicus perfection, and chaos excess battled for dominance over local physics, their competing frequencies creating interference patterns that weakened all their control systems simultaneously. Through the chaos, I glimpsed the solution, not choosing between their harmonies, but introducing a frequency that negated harmony itself. Tech Auger, 3-way interference, creating quantum acoustic dead zones. Harmonic cascade destabilizing at 17 discrete nodes. Countdown to grand harmonization. 0y0.05, 47. Break the rhythm, I commanded Caster, my voice steady, though reality vibrated around us like struck glass. No man fires on the same beat. Step on the wrong foot. Breathe on the off count. His scions adapted with practiced precision, choosing different cadences that shattered the battlefield's harmonic symmetry through deliberate discord. Lassfire stitched red threads through air thick with sonic pressure, striking when the song demanded silence. Private Hale staggered as a servitor's acoustic blast resonated through his bones, microfractures appearing in geometric patterns, yet he continued firing in arrhythmic bursts that refused to synchronize. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 moved with mechanical inevitability, his betrayal no longer concealed behind protocol. Mechadendrites lanced toward my cranial jack, while Binharic cant flowed from his throat, transforming into melody that slotted into the grand harmonization like a missing component. "You were always the final variable," he said, his voice acquiring the station's harmonic baseline. Auto-sanction cleared your integration across 17 contingencies. This station is merely the most elegant delivery system. Sergeant Caster slammed into him with brutal efficiency, their struggle becoming a blur of steel and doctrine as competing frequencies doubled Xerath's strength every 9th beat, while Caster cursed in drill cant, older than half the sector. Atmospheric analysis, reality displacement at 98% completion. Station hull integrity oscillating between solid and sound states. Matter exists in quantum acoustic superposition. I approached the resonance core's control interface, where 3 sets of influences reached for my consciousness through harmonic telepathy. Magos Supremus Orpheus offered mathematical perfection through crystalline certainty. Symphonicus whispered of transcendent sensation beyond mortal comprehension. Between them, Hospitaller Seraphina generated zones of blessed quiet, her voice carrying the promise of sacrifice for the greater good. The interface was colder than vacuum and hotter than confession, recognizing my cranial jack without physical contact. The connection formed through pressure that didn't press and light that didn't shine, my skull becoming a chapel where 17 candles burned in wind that had learned arithmetic. I chose discord, not the chaos hymn that clawed at sensation's edges, not Orpheus's crystalline obedience, but a wound opened in music itself. My interrogator training rose with mechanical clarity, the canticle of false notes, the litany against beautiful equations, techniques designed to resist psychic harmonization through deliberate imperfection. The null frequency erupted from my consciousness like blood from a severed artery, tearing through the station's harmonic network with destructive interference that made reality stutter. Not sound, but the absence of sound, the mathematical expression of refusal itself. Neural feedback. Consciousness stretching across collapsing network, experiencing simultaneous death screams from 17 research stations, personality matrix fragmenting under quantum acoustic cascade failure. The choice triggered a harmonic cascade that began destroying not just our station, but the entire acoustic network spanning the sector. My consciousness stretched across the collapsing system, experiencing the death agonies of thousands of perfected tech priests as they were released from harmonic slavery through catastrophic frequency dissolution. Impossible, Orpheus declared through crystalline telepathy that fractured as his distributed consciousness experienced system-wide failure. The equation cannot accommodate null variables. Mathematical impossibility cannot exist with imperfect harmony. But impossibility was precisely what I had chosen. The fundamental right to refuse participation in any equation that demanded consciousness as currency. Environmental destruction reached apocalyptic levels as the station became a maelstrom of competing realities. Imperial areas maintained rigid geometric order, even as they crumbled into constituent molecules. Mechanicus sections transformed into crystalline chambers before shattering like frozen prayers. Chaos zones exploded into sensory overload before dissolving into painful silence. Telemetry. Station structural integrity at critical resonance, explosion imminent. Detecting similar cascade failures across entire sector network. Warning. Unknown entities manifesting through harmonic void. The revelations struck with ice-cold clarity as something unprecedented began emerging through tears in local space-time. The null frequency hadn't just destroyed the network, it had created a harmonic void that attracted entities from the deep warp, things that existed in the spaces between sounds, creatures that fed on silence rather than sensation. These null demons represented the opposite of chaos excess, absolute void, perfect emptiness, the hunger for non-existence itself. They flowed through bulkheads like liquid darkness, consuming sound and light and eventually matter itself, their appetite growing to include the life force of anyone who made noise. Seraphina underwent final transformation, becoming a living embodiment of the null frequency as her consciousness expanded beyond individual identity. "I can feel myself dissolving," she whispered, her words creating pockets of blessed quiet. "But this is necessary. The silence must spread, or the equation will regenerate elsewhere." Comms. All communications ceasing, null entities consuming electronic signatures, emergency protocols failing. The three-faction battle became a desperate alliance as Imperial, Mechanicus, and Chaos forces realized they faced extinction from an enemy that couldn't be fought with. Conventional weapons. The evacuation became a nightmare of enforced silence as any noise drew the entity's hungry attention. "Sir," Castor reported through hand signals, his voice too dangerous to use. "Structural resonance approaching critical frequency. We need to reach the shuttle before this entire station explodes like a tuning fork." As we fought toward the docking bay through zones where reality had ceased to function properly, I realized the terrible cost of my choice. Through the growing void, I glimpsed 17 dead zones across the sector, where warp travel would become impossible, effectively isolating entire systems from Imperial control. The null frequency had been necessary to prevent galactic conquest through acoustic manipulation, but I had created something potentially worse. Areas where existence itself became negotiable, where silence hunted the living with patient, inevitable certainty. The station held its breath, as reality waited to learn whether silence or song would claim dominion over the galaxy's future. In that moment of perfect quiet, all the wrong voices stopped singing our names, replaced by something that whispered in the spaces between heartbeats, promising the ultimate peace of non-existence itself. My consciousness became a crucible, where three different harmonic influences waged war for possession of my soul, each faction's song attempting to overwrite my personality with their ideological frequency. The psychic assault manifested as acoustic warfare within my mind, while my hand remained extended toward the resonance core's interface, crystalline surfaces pulsing with combined will from imperial perfection, chaos sensation, and the terrible promise of willing sacrifice. Magos Supremus Orpheus pushed mathematical certainty directly into my synapses through crystalline telepathy, his distributed consciousness offering eternal purpose within equations that would reshape the galaxy into a perfect instrument. The Mechanicus network sang of absolute order, individual identity preserved within collective symphony, consciousness expanded beyond flesh through harmonic resonance rather than mechanical augmentation. Join the eternal equation. His voice resonated through 17 different frequencies simultaneously. Death becomes transformation. Individual suffering dissolves into collective function. Mathematical perfection achieved through willing participation in the greater harmony. Noise champion Symphonicus countered with frequencies that bit into Orpheus's harmony like rust through consecrated bell metal, whispering of transcendent sensation beyond mortal comprehension. Every nerve ending would scream with pleasure, every synapse fire with impossible experience, offering liberation from imperial doctrine through perfect sensory overload. Embrace sensation without boundary. His corruption sang through my neural pathways. Pain transformed into ecstasy. Experience without limit. The galaxy becomes your instrument of pleasure through Slanesh's infinite embrace. Between these titanic influences, Hospitaller Seraphina's voice emerged with devastating clarity. Not order or sensation, but sacrifice. Her connection to the acoustic network revealed the null frequency option that neither faction had anticipated, a harmonic void that would sever all connections and return everyone to their original state. The Emperor's true voice lies in silence, her consciousness whispered through quantum acoustic resonance. Freedom preserved through willing martyrdom, the right to refuse participation in any equation that demands consciousness as currency. Neural activity, consciousness fragmenting across 17 different frequency bands. Triharmonic pressure approaching critical dissolution threshold. Personality matrix destabilizing under quantum acoustic cascade. I chose discord, not the chaos hymn that clawed at sensation's edges, not Orpheus's crystalline obedience, but a wound opened in music itself. My interrogator training rose with mechanical clarity, the canticle of false notes, the litany against beautiful equations, techniques designed to resist psychic harmonization through deliberate imperfection. The null frequency erupted from my consciousness like blood from a severed artery, tearing through the station's harmonic network with destructive interference that made reality stutter. Not sound, but the absence of sound. The mathematical expression of refusal itself, propagating across quantum acoustic links to 17 research stations simultaneously. Impossible, Orpheus declared through crystalline telepathy that fractured as his distributed consciousness experienced system-wide failure. Mathematical impossibility cannot exist within perfect harmony. But impossibility was precisely what I had chosen. The fundamental right to exist outside any equation that demanded participation. Tech auger. Harmonic cascade failure detected across network. Null frequency propagating through quantum acoustic links. Reality displacement reaching critical threshold. The choice triggered catastrophic feedback as the resonance core began shattering like frozen lightning, its warp glass surface spiderwebbing with cracks that shone with impossible darkness. Through the fractures, something unprecedented began emerging, entities that existed in the spaces between sounds, creatures that fed on silence rather than sensation. Null demons flowed through the tears like liquid darkness, their forms not made of shadow, but of the absence of light itself. They represented the opposite of chaos excess, absolute void, perfect emptiness, the hunger for non-existence that consumed sound, light, and eventually matter itself. The three-faction battle ceased instantly, as Imperial, Mechanicus, and Chaos forces faced extinction from an enemy that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. Emperor's children froze mid-scream as their sonic weapons became dinner bells for entities that devoured noise. Tech priests watched in horror as their augmetic systems fell silent, consumed by creatures that existed in the gaps between binary code. "Silence," I commanded through hand signals, my voice too dangerous to use. Any sound draws their attention. Atmospheric analysis. All acoustic emissions within 17-meter radius suppressed. Energy signatures fading. Local gravity field decaying as matter transitions to null state. Sergeant Castor adapted with practiced precision, his tactical signals becoming a dance of survival as Squad Caster learned to move without servo motor whine, without ceramite click, their breathing held until lungs ached. Private Hale stumbled, his knees scraping deck plating with a sound like whispered prayer. The null demon flowed toward him instantly, and where he had stood, only perfect darkness remained. Environmental transformation accelerated as the station became a maelstrom of competing realities, torn apart by the null frequency's propagation. Imperial zones maintained rigid order even as they dissolved into constituent silence. Mechanicus sections transformed into crystalline chambers before shattering into harmonic void. Chaos areas exploded into sensory overload before being consumed by absolute quiet. Hospitaler Seraphina underwent final transformation, becoming a living embodiment of the null frequency as her consciousness expanded beyond individual identity. Her form shimmered, becoming translucent at the edges while she generated zones of blessed quiet that masked our acoustic signatures. "I am becoming the void," she whispered, her words creating pockets of protective silence. "But this is necessary. The equation must be prevented from regenerating elsewhere." Telemetry. Station structural integrity at critical resonance. 17 research stations across sector experiencing simultaneous cascade failure. Network collapse imminent. Tech Dominus Zerath 9's betrayal became irrelevant as his augmetic systems failed, consumed by entities that fed on electronic noise. Magos Supremus. Orpheus's crystalline form fractured as his distributed consciousness experienced network-wide dissolution, his final equation cut short by absolute silence. The evacuation became a nightmare of enforced quiet as we fought toward the docking bay through zones where reality had ceased to function properly. Any vibration, any electronic hum, any whispered prayer attracted the null demon's hungry attention. The station's corridors became waveguides not for sound, but for its absence, channels that amplified silence until it gained physical weight. Comms. All communications ceasing. Null entities consuming electronic signatures. Emergency protocols failing as machine spirits fall silent. We reached the docking bay to discover our shuttle physically intact, but spiritually dead. Its machine spirit consumed, its systems existing, but unable to function. The vessel sat like a perfect sculpture of itself, every component present, but lacking the essential spark that separated machine from mere matter. Through the bay's viewport, 17 dead zones spread across local space where the null frequency had torn reality itself, creating areas where existence became negotiable, and silence hunted the living with patient, inevitable certainty. I realized the terrible cost of my choice. The harmonic network's destruction had prevented galactic conquest through acoustic manipulation, but I had created something potentially worse. Zones where the fundamental right to exist required constant vigilance against the hunger of absolute void. Seraphina's sacrifice maintained our protective bubble of controlled silence, but she was fading with each breath, becoming more absence than presence as the null frequency claimed her consciousness. The station held its breath around us, and in that moment of perfect quiet, I understood that silence itself had learned to hunger. The null demons pressed against our protective void like tide against shore, patient as entropy, waiting for the moment when even our thoughts would make enough noise to feed their endless appetite for non-existence. The harmonic void pressed against reality like a patient tide, transforming local space into something that hurt to perceive directly. Through the docking bay's viewport, 17 dead zones spread across the sector like wounds in the fabric of existence. Areas where starlight simply ceased, not blocked by matter but consumed by entities that existed in the spaces between photons. The null demons flowed through bulkheads like liquid darkness, their forms constructed from the absence of form itself, pressing against our protective bubble with hunger that transcended physical sensation. Our shuttle sat before us like a perfect sculpture of its former self, every component physically intact, but spiritually dead. The machine spirit had been consumed, leaving behind systems that responded to input without comprehension, mechanical reflexes operating without consciousness to guide them. Frost feathered along the docking rails in non-agonal rosettes, while my breath fogged only inside my helm, forbidden to touch the air that had learned to hunger. Tech auger. Station structural integrity at critical resonance. Hull vibrating at natural frequency. Explosion imminent. Countdown to catastrophic failure. 001143. Hospitaller Serafina maintained our protective void through willing sacrifice, her form becoming increasingly translucent as the null frequency claimed her consciousness. She existed now as a living embodiment of controlled silence, generating zones of blessed quiet that masked our acoustic signatures from entities that fed on any disturbance in the perfect stillness they demanded. "The shuttle requires harmonic initialization," she whispered, her words creating pockets of protective silence. "Sound is necessary to awaken dormant consciousness patterns, but any acoustic signature will pierce the protective void I can generate." Sergeant Castor's hand signals had become a language of survival, as his remaining scions moved like ghosts through corridors, where reality functioned according to the principle of absence. 2 short taps, one long against his vambrace. What now? I answered with knuckles against ceramite. Wake it, without hymns. The solution crystallized with horrifying clarity. Restarting the shuttle required generating enough acoustic energy to reanimate its machine spirit. But any sound would attract every null daemon within the station's superstructure. We needed a controlled harmonic pulse, not enough to restart the network, but sufficient to create a momentary sound shadow that would mask our escape. Atmospheric analysis. All acoustic emissions within 17-meter radius suppressed. Null entities detecting micro-vibrations from augmetic systems. Protective silence degrading with each electronic pulse. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 approached with augmetic systems failing, his mechadendrites moving in erratic patterns as electronic components succumbed to the spreading void. His betrayal had become irrelevant, as the null frequency consumed his ability to communicate with machine spirits, reducing him to flesh and failing metal. "Forgive the expedience," he said through vocal cords that clicked with mechanical precision. "The shuttle requires specific initialization frequencies. My augmetic systems can provide the necessary harmonic pulse, but doing so will create acoustic signatures that attract everything that feeds on sound." Environmental transformation accelerated as the station became a resonating chamber tuned to amplify absence itself. Corridors stretched beyond their original dimensions, creating acoustic shadows where the null demons gathered like pools of concentrated darkness. The superstructure groaned without sound, metal fatigue appearing in geometric patterns as harmonic stress concentrated along structural weak points. I approached the shuttle's control interface, where dead screens reflected our faces like black mirrors, their surfaces showing not darkness, but the complete absence of light itself. The machine spirit's death had left behind a vessel that existed but could not function. All the mechanical systems present, yet lacking the essential spark that separated living machine from mere matter. Comms. All Imperial communications in sector being consumed by null zones. 17 research stations experiencing simultaneous cascade failure. Network collapse complete. Serafina's protective field weakened with each passing moment, her consciousness dissolving into the null frequency as she became more absence than presence. Her reliquary spun against empty air where her chest should have been, creating tiny chimes that somehow generated silence instead of sound. "I can maintain the protective void for 8 more minutes," she whispered through lips that were becoming translucent. But restarting the shuttle will require someone to interface directly with its consciousness, making them visible to everything that hungers in the dark. The decision required careful calculation of competing impossibilities. I extended my cranial jack toward the shuttle's primary interface, preparing to generate the controlled harmonic pulse necessary for mechanical resurrection. The connection formed through pressure that didn't press and light that didn't shine, my consciousness becoming a bridge between silence and sound. Neural activity. Generating controlled harmonic pulse. Risk of permanent integration with null frequency, 73%. Synaptic pathways destabilizing under quantum acoustic cascade. Zerath 9 extended his primary mechadendrite toward the shuttle's secondary systems, while Castor set a perimeter with things that could not speak. Tripwires of monofilament, caltrops like black stars, frag charges disarmed to bleed only light if coaxed. His scions moved with drill hall precision. Memories of 1,000 orders condensed into single hand signs. The harmonic pulse erupted from my consciousness, like blood from a severed artery. A single, perfect note designed to create an illusion of emptiness, where there was none. The shuttle systems responded with electronic whispers that seemed deafening in the enforced silence, startup sequences creating acoustic signatures that pierced Seraphina's protective void like needles through silk. Shuttle systems. Machine spirit reigniting. Primary consciousness patterns awakening. Warning, acoustic signature penetrating protective silence. Every null demon within the station's superstructure turned toward us with hunger that transcended physical sensation. They swarmed like a tide of concentrated darkness, drawn by the sudden, glorious noise of mechanical resurrection. The shuttle breathed, its engines rotating 1 degree as ghost hums strengthened into operational readiness. Seraphina underwent final transformation, her form shimmering violently before diffusing into a cloud of pure, resonant silence that absorbed the encroaching null demons. Her consciousness dissolved to buy us precious seconds, becoming a living void that masked our acoustic signatures, even as it erased her from existence. "Now!" I commanded, as reality held its breath around us. Castor's hand slammed the embark lever, while the shuttle's machine spirit awakened with a scream that was beautiful and terrible. The engines roared to life, tearing us free from docking clamps as the station imploded around us. Not with explosion, but with terrifying inward collapse of matter into pure, hungry silence. Telemetry. 17 dead zones established across sector. Warp travel impossible within affected regions. All Imperial communications severed. Through the viewport, I watched the station's death create a scar in space itself, a wound that devoured starlight and left behind only the vast, empty maw of absolute void. Seraphina's voice echoed faintly in my mind, a lullaby of silence that kept the null demons at bay, her final gift ensuring our survival while 17 systems faced isolation from the greater Imperium. The null frequency had prevented galactic conquest through acoustic manipulation, but at terrible cost. Entire worlds would wither in perfect silence, cut off from warp travel, destined to develop independence, or fall to threats that could navigate the acoustic void we had created. As we jumped to warp, the reality settled like lead. We had saved the galaxy from harmonic tyranny by teaching silence itself to hunger. The shuttle tore free from Omicron Sanctus as the station imploded not with fire, but with terrifying silence. Reality folding inward like a prayer spoken backwards until 17 dead zones spread across local space, where starlight simply ceased to exist. Our warp translation felt wrong from the first heartbeat. The familiar kaleidoscopic nightmare of the Imperium replaced by corridors of absolute quiet that made the Geller field shiver with frequencies that shouldn't exist. Shuttle systems. Warp translation stable but anomalous. Geller field integrity at 89%. Warning. Null adherent signatures detected on hull plating. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating in non-agonal cycles. The field singing the wrong hymn. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 reported through failing augmetics. his betrayal rendered meaningless by survival necessity. Standard liturgies attract the void entities. They follow sound through warp space like predators following blood scent. The revelation crystallized with ice-cold clarity. The null demons hadn't been contained to real space. They existed in the spaces between frequencies, the gaps where music should have been, but wasn't. Our Gellerfield's protective hymnal was a beacon drawing them through the Imperium's acoustic shadows. Environmental horror manifested as the warp around us listened rather than howled. Colors that should not exist failed to appear, while pressure without mass pressed against our hull like velvet hands seeking entry. Through the viewport, indentations in perception flowed toward us, creases in the not light where entities constructed from pure absence moved with patient, inevitable hunger. Atmospheric analysis. Internal atmosphere vibrating at subsonic frequencies. Null contamination detected in air recycling systems. Crew psychological profiles showing acute acoustic sensitivity syndrome. Sergeant Castor adapted with grim efficiency, his hand signals becoming a language of enforced silence as his remaining scions learned to exist without servo motor whine, without ceramite click, their augmetic systems shutting down automatically to avoid detection. Private Hale's empty crash couch served as stark reminder. The first sound had claimed him instantly, leaving only the space where his voice should have been. Geller field modulation required. Zerath 9 whispered through vocal cords that clicked with mechanical precision. We must invert the protective psalm, whisper within the whisper, generate silence instead of song. I authorized the modification with palm sigils only the machine spirit recognized. The field's timbre shifted as sacred algorithms rewrote themselves, transforming the usual protective hymnal into something unprecedented. The veil of unsaid, a prayer constructed from deliberate absence rather than devotional presence. Geller field, modulation accepted, transitioning to inverted litany protocols. Harmonic leakage, 0.04%. External null attention, temporarily diffused. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The pressure outside recoiled with animal confusion, as if predators had found their prey's scent trail looping back through itself. For 9 heartbeats, the indentations in perception thinned, allowing us to move through acoustic shadows where the entity's hunger couldn't reach. Hospitaller Seraphina's voice threaded through our modified field like a lullaby of protective silence. Her consciousness dissolved into the null frequency, yet somehow maintaining coherent communication. Do not answer if the void calls your name. Her words created pockets of blessed quiet. I am becoming the absence between thoughts, but this is necessary to mask your passage. Neural activity. Persistent null frequency resonance detected in cerebral cortex. Auditory processing permanently altered. Increased sensitivity to acoustic anomalies developing across entire crew. Time lost meaning as we drifted through warp space that had learned to hunger for sound. My chronometer crawled with mechanical arrogance, while reality negotiated new terms of existence around us. The shuttle's machine spirit whimpered once in my mind, before learning patience from stone, its consciousness dimming to avoid attracting attention from entities that fed on electronic noise. The null demons pressed against our inverted field like tide against shore, testing the boundaries of our protective silence with touches that weren't physical contact, but the absence of contact itself. Where they brushed our hull, frost feathered in non-agonal rosettes while metal quieted to shivering, matter transitioning toward null state through quantum acoustic dissolution. Comms. All external communications impossible, internal Vox systems experiencing systematic failure, emergency protocols adapting to hand signal requirements only. Environmental transformation accelerated as our passage through corrupted warp space left traces of acoustic void clinging to the shuttle's superstructure, like burrs caught in wool. The entities hadn't been left behind. Fragments of their hunger had attached themselves to our reality, waiting for the first careless sound to feed their endless appetite for non-existence. Zerath 9's augmetic systems failed progressively as null contamination spread through electronic components, reducing him to flesh and clicking metal that generated dangerous acoustic signatures. "Forgive the expedience," he said through vocal cords that attracted immediate attention. A null demon flowed toward his position instantly, consuming first his voice, then the space where his voice should have been. The sacrifice bought us precious seconds as our translation window approached. Reality held its breath while the shuttle chose between existence and void, its machine spirit gathering courage for the final push into real space. The veil of unsaid held against impossible pressure as entities that existed between frequencies press closer, drawn by the warmth of our negation. Translation. Window opening in 0001:17. Geller field stress at maximum sustainable levels. Warning. Null adherence will cross into real space with high probability. Seraphina's protective presence faltered as she dissolved completely into the null frequency, becoming a living void that absorbed the encroaching entities through willing sacrifice. Her final whisper echoed across quantum acoustic resonance. The silence follows. It has learned to hunger, and it will not forget the taste of your reality. The translation completed with a flash of inverted light that hurt to perceive, depositing us into real space that felt wrong. 17 wounds torn through the star field, like moth holes in velvet, dead zones where the null frequency had carved permanent scars in the galaxy's acoustic fabric. The burrs of absolute silence remained attached to our hull, tightening like patient hands. Specs. Real space coordinates confirmed. 17 dead zones detected across sector. All Imperial communications severed within affected regions. Hull contamination, persistent and spreading. Through the viewport, I watched entire systems isolated by acoustic void, their worlds destined to wither in perfect silence or develop independence beyond Imperial reach. The grand harmonization had been stopped, but at terrible cost. We had taught silence itself to hunger, creating an enemy that fed on the absence of everything the Imperium represented. The shuttle limped toward distant Imperial lines while Seraphina's lullaby continued echoing in my mind, a fragile shield against the hungry quiet that had become our new reality. Behind us, 17 sectors faced isolation from the greater galaxy, their fate sealed by an equation that had learned to subtract itself from existence. The null frequency had not been contained. It was spreading, patient as entropy, waiting for the moment when even our thoughts would make enough noise to feed the vast, empty appetite we had unleashed upon the stars. The shuttle limped through real space, with null adherence clinging to our hull like frost that had learned to hunger, their presence creating pockets of dangerous silence that expanded with each passing hour. 3 days after translation from corrupted warp space, the contamination had spread through 17% of our superstructure, consuming sound before it could form, while our machine spirit whimpered in electronic whispers too faint to attract attention. Shuttle systems, hull contamination spreading at 0.3% per hour, atmospheric recycling experiencing progressive failure, power conduits showing stress fractures in non-agonal patterns, machine spirit consciousness dimming to avoid null entity detection. Sergeant Castor maintained discipline through hand signals that had become our language of survival, his remaining scions existing in enforced silence as augmetic systems shut down automatically. The absence of servo-motor whine and ceramite click created oppressive quiet that made breathing feel like blasphemy against the void's patient hunger. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 approached the maintenance console with mechadendrites that sparked and failed, his betrayal rendered meaningless by survival necessity. Null contamination consumed his augmetic systems progressively, reducing him to flesh and clicking metal that generated dangerous acoustic signatures with each failing component. Harmonic interference lattice, he whispered through vocal cords that attracted immediate attention from entities pressed against our hull. 9-node configuration. Create shadow of sound where void expects feast. The solution crystallized with horrifying clarity. We needed controlled acoustic interference, not enough to restart any network, but sufficient to create momentary confusion among the null adherents. A non-agonal pulse pattern, timed to 17-second intervals when their grip loosened to taste the universe's silence. Tech auger. Capacitor banks at 41% efficiency. Hull resonance maps available. Warning: any acoustic leakage will compromise protective veil maintained by Hospitaller consciousness fragments. Hospitaller Seraphina's presence threaded through our modified Geller field like a lullaby of protective silence, her consciousness dissolved into the null frequency, yet maintaining coherent communication. The pulse must not be heard. Her voice created pockets of blessed quiet. Make shadow of bell that never rings. I extended my cranial jack toward the shuttle's primary interface, while Zerath 9 bled sacred lubricants into secondary systems, his failing augmetics writing binaric equations that resolved into musical notation. The canticle of false notes reshaped as interference pattern designed to be swaddled in Seraphina's silence until the moment of release. Neural link. Phase alignment achieved. Lattice nodes primed in nonagonal formation. Escape window projecting in 17 seconds. Warning: Zerath 9's vocal systems attracting null attention. Environmental transformation accelerated as null entities tested our hull's integrity from within, their hunger causing metal to transition toward void state through quantum acoustic dissolution. Private Dace's gauntlet brushed a contaminated strut. The microscopic vibration rang like cathedral bells to creatures that fed on absence itself. "Forgive the expedience," Zerath 9 said, his voice beautiful and terrible as it pierced Seraphina's protective veil. Null adherents flowed toward his position instantly, drawn by the acoustic signature of failing augmetics. He stepped deliberately into their path, his consciousness accepting dissolution to buy us precious seconds. The harmonic pulse erupted in perfect silence, a waveform designed to exist as shadow rather than substance. For 17 heartbeats, the adherents loosened their grip to drink what they mistook for feast. We burned the capacitors in precise exhale, while Zerath 9's sacrifice created the distraction necessary for escape. Ejection sequence. Null adherents converging on decoy target. External hunger temporarily diverted. Engine ignition window, now available. The shuttle's machine spirit awakened with electronic scream that was beautiful and terrible. Engines roaring to life as we tore free from the contaminated zone. Behind us, null entities swarmed toward Zerath 9's dissolving form like famine toward a bell, their attention fixed on his willing sacrifice. Seraphina underwent final transformation, her consciousness expanding into a protective halo that extended behind our stern like crown of not light. The adherents lifted from our hull and joined her with patient certainty, fixed to the pilgrim star of her willing absence. Atmospheric analysis. External null tether established. Protective silence maintained through consciousness anchor. Warning: anchor persistence dependent on continued sacrifice. 3 hours later, we approached Inquisition Fortress Silentium, its walls armored in deliberate quiet, while void shields modulated into frequencies that absorbed rather than deflected. No beacons sang welcome, no docks called greeting, only coordinates handwritten into spectral cipher. Come and be still. The docking sequence became ritual of careful silence as servitors moved without vocal augmetics, their movements creating zones of blessed quiet, where null contamination temporarily weakened. Decontamination chambers flooded with oils modified to absorb sound rather than purify flesh. Quarantine protocols. 17-day isolation period initiated. Acoustic contamination analysis required. Subject shows permanent alteration of auditory processing centers. Recommend specialized assignment to acoustic anomaly investigation. Lord Inquisitor Vex received my preliminary testimony through Vox scramblers that converted speech into visual patterns, his questions appearing as Gothic script on sanctified screens. The debriefing revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Similar harmonic research conducted across 12 other sectors, coordinated through quantum acoustic links that spanned the galaxy. Strategic assessment, 17 systems isolated from Imperial control. Estimated strategic loss, 2.7 billion citizens cut from astropathic communication. Null frequency spreading at sublight speeds. Sector-wide quarantine indefinite. Through the fortress viewport, I watched the 17 dead zones, spread across the starfield like wounds in velvet, their boundaries marked by patrol vessels maintaining careful distance. The null frequency had not been contained. It was learning, adapting, teaching silence itself to hunger with methodical precision. Intelligence report. Similar acoustic anomalies reported in 12 additional sectors. Pattern suggests coordinated emergence. 17 additional interrogators requesting specialized investigation protocols. Seraphina's lullaby continued echoing in my mind, fragile shield against hungry quiet that pressed against reality like velvet hands seeking entry. The grand harmonization had been prevented, but we had unleashed something potentially worse, an enemy that existed in spaces between thoughts, feeding on the silence we had created through desperate necessity. The war against acoustic tyranny was over, but the battle against the void itself had only begun. 3 months after Omicron Sanctus folded into silence, I record this final testimony aboard Inquisition Fortress Silentium, orbiting the quarantined remains of the Canticus sector like a monument to Pyrrhic victory. The fortress walls absorb sound until even memory feels muffled. Void shields modulated into frequencies that drink noise rather than deflect it. Through armored viewports, 17 dead zones spread across the starfield like moth holes burned through velvet, each wound a sermon that should never be preached again. I write by hand. Cogitators hum too loudly, and the null adherents listen for electronic whispers. Ink scratches parchment with modest rasp that warding baffles swallow before it can attract attention from entities that feed on the spaces between frequencies. My augmetic jack remains sheathed beneath sanctified leather, not from corruption fear, but respect for silence that has learned to hunt. Inquisitorial report. Subject: Interrogator, Lex Mechanic, Van Serek. Classification: Acoustic anomaly, Specialist. Condition: Stable with persistent null frequency resonance. Auditory processing permanently altered. Recommend specialized assignment to Ordo Silentium protocols. The harmonic network's collapse created consequences beyond calculation. 17 systems remain isolated from Imperial control, their 2.7 billion citizens severed from astropathic communication. Warp travel impossible within affected regions. Some worlds have gone completely quiet. Populations either consumed by void entities or transformed into something requiring no sound to communicate. Others broadcast desperate quantum mechanical signals, ghostly text scrolling across sanctified screens. Environmental contamination persists in my neural pathways, leaving me permanently altered by null frequency exposure. I detect acoustic anomalies across impossible distances, the faint echo of Hospitaller Seraphina's lullaby threading through quantum acoustic resonance, maintaining protective barriers against entities existing in spaces between thoughts. Her sacrifice continues 3 months after dissolution, consciousness distributed across the void to keep hungry silence at bay. Strategic assessment: similar acoustic anomalies detected in 12 additional sectors. Pattern suggests coordinated emergence across galactic scale. Mechanicus conspiracy deeper than initially assessed. Project Orpheus confirmed as multi-sector initiative spanning centuries. Squadcaster paces cruciform halls like a metronome set to grief. Of his scions, only 4 survived the station's collapse. Their prayers are written in chalk along sanctioned corridors, 9 words repeated, crossed out, written again. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 occupies a single line in my casualty ledger, notation I had never used before. Provided discord sufficient for egress. The investigation's aftermath revealed the conspiracy's true scope through documents recovered before final collapse. The Grand Harmonization was merely the first movement in a symphony designed to transform the entire Imperium into a vast instrument, human consciousness providing music that held reality together through mathematical precision rather than faith. Billions of minds would have served as processing nodes in a living supercomputer spanning the galaxy. Intelligence report. 17 other interrogators across the galaxy report similar acoustic contamination. Specialized investigation protocols initiated. Lord Inquisitor Vex authorized formation of dedicated anti-harmonic unit designated Ordo Silentium. Ghost songs emerge without source at Vespers and shift change, riding recycled air and the thin sheen of frost forming on observation slits. 9 notes, always 9, their intervals perfect until meaning bends. Devotional brass in reliquary vaults hums from within sealed cases. The fortress machine spirits learn to whisper, then learn to stop entirely. Through my modified perception, I sense the null frequency spreading with methodical patience, teaching silence itself to hunger, while isolated systems develop independence beyond Imperial reach. Dead zone boundaries calcify like scar tissue, patrolled by vessels whose crews communicate through hand signals developed for regions where sound has become weaponized. Medical assessment. Persistent after effect. Subject cannot experience true silence. Even in vacuum simulation chambers, detection of acoustic anomalies continues. Seraphina's protective presence maintains barriers against void entity ingress through quantum acoustic anchor points. My quarters overlook the quarantine perimeter, where patrol ships maintain silent vigil. Modified Geller fields generate protective silence rather than traditional hymnal barriers. Machine spirits dim to whispers, barely qualifying as consciousness. The vessels carry specialized equipment designed to function without acoustic interference, their hulls wrapped in baffling materials that absorb rather than conduct sound. At night cycle, I lie awake, counting intervals between heartbeats. Every 9th pulse tastes of copper, bones answering frequencies no one admits hearing. Null adherents that clung to our shuttle were lured away by Seraphina's final sacrifice, but fragments. 12 additional sectors show evidence of similar research programs. Harmonic weapon development continuing despite Canticus Mortis failure. Recommend immediate investigation of remaining facilities before equation regenerates elsewhere. The war against acoustic tyranny achieved Pyrrhic victory at best. We prevented the Mechanicus from transforming the galaxy into their perfect instrument, but the cure may prove worse than the disease. Silence has learned to hunger, remembering reality's taste with patient, inevitable certainty. Lord Inquisitor Vex communicated through light points on sanctified slate, words shimmering like fireflies arranged by careful hands. His questions revealed the scope of our failure. Similar phenomena emerging across 12 sectors, some without research stations, equations found scratched in frost on pilgrimage stones never touched by the Mechanicus. Grand harmonization prevented but at strategic cost, equivalent to entire subsector loss. Null frequency containment impossible through conventional means. Acoustic tyranny replaced by acoustic void, uncertain which represents greater threat. As I seal this testimony within sanctified vaults, Seraphina's lullaby echoes one final time through my consciousness, promising protection while warning of greater harmonies stirring in the deep warp. 17 other interrogators report similar phenomena, suggesting the grand harmonization was merely opening notes in a symphony spanning the entire galaxy. Outside my window, dead zones continue expanding with mathematical precision, their boundaries spelling equations in the language of absence itself. The Imperium has gained 17 specialists in acoustic warfare at the cost of 17 systems. A trade history will judge with harsh clarity of perfect, hungry silence. Testimony sealed under inquisitorial mandate. Classification, Hereticus Maximus. Access restricted to Ordo Silentium personnel. May the Emperor preserve us from the silence that hungers. The stylus completes its final mark as reality holds its breath. Somewhere in the void between frequencies, echoes of a perfect choir continue singing equations that could reshape existence itself. The null frequency awaits its next performance, patient as entropy, while 17 wounds in the starfield refuse to heal. Behind me, the fortress breathes in deliberate irregularity. Beyond, the galaxy learns new ways to hunger. And in the deep Imperium, 17 other interrogators adjust their quills simultaneously, hearing the same faint lullaby of silence, and begin to write.